I bring the work of great philosophers and scientists in my more recent anthology, The Portable Atheist, an anthology of writings of unbelief, to bear, to say that no, it is the oldest argument that our species takes part in. And it's the reason why I'm fascinated by it, interested in it, willing to conduct it, never refuse a challenge to do so. Religion was our first try at cognition. It was our first try at epistemology. It was our first try at philosophy. It was in some ways our first try at mathematics. It's what we came up with because we are pattern-seeking and ambitious and freedom-seeking mammals when we didn't know we lived on a round or spherical planet. We didn't know that we were in circulation around other heavenly bodies. We didn't know about gravity. We didn't know there were microorganisms stronger than ourselves that explained a lot. We didn't know why the heavens darkened and rained or hailed. We didn't know why there were earthquakes or floods. It was the first tremulous attempt to make sense. And in the work of Aquinas and Augustine and elsewhere, we see the first glimmerings of our attempts at philosophy. And in the Cranmer prayer book and the King James version of the Bible that happen to be my favorites, and the English hymnal, we also have the beginnings of a literature. The first time everyone who could read had all read one book and had a common discourse. So it's, for me, a very, very important and honorable, and at its best even a noble subject. But of course it is man-made and a delusion. And it is used by wicked people to exploit the credulousness of innocent people to create not an eternal life or life of freedom in another world, but a real, actual, material, secular dictatorship now claimed by people who have the arrogance to say that they themselves are acting in the name of God. And that's why it has to be opposed.
Richards, I'll let you respond to that, and then I have a question for you.
Okay. My response, I want to make clear that the actual subject of the debate is the question of atheism versus theism and not the question of any specific religion. Obviously, theism manifests itself in some particular form, in Islam or Christianity or Judaism, but that is, in fact, a separate subject. And so I prefer to restrict my comments to the subject of the debate itself.
That the wrong way around, I'm sorry, because that's why I mentioned all religions instead of just one.
Right, and I do not think, and I think we probably agree on this point, that the simple prevalence of a particular religion in a society is any particular mark for its truth or falsehood. There are perhaps, a billion Buddhists in Asia, over perhaps a billion Muslims around the world, and over a billion Christians. So I don't think simply the numbers answer finally the question of the truth of one or the other. And I think that the reasons and the basis on which we decide a more philosophical question, such as atheism or theism, are separate. This has always been the case in the Christian tradition, that the natural world, as Paul says in the book of Romans, he says, from the foundation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen from the things that have been made. That is, that the existence of a creator God is the sort of thing that you can discern if you look at the natural world around you. That doesn't mean that every question we ask as human beings, or everything, for instance, that a Christian would believe about God, is discernible from the natural world. But I do think there is enough discernible from the public evidence that is available, from the direct introspection to which we all have access, and the best knowledge we have from the natural world, to conclude that there is something like a God-seeking religion. I do not think that's the basis on which we establish the more specific claims of the religions.
This must be the same St. Paul who rests everything on what he calls the evidence of things not seen. Must it not? You see, this happens all the time. When you talk with the religious or those who believe these books are more than man-made texts, St. Paul says the evidence of things not seen. It may be the most beautiful of his letters that insists on that. Jesus says, "I come not to bring peace but a sword." Half the people you meet say they love Jesus because he preaches non-violence. In the Old Testament, there's no mention of hell. There's no punishment of the dead. You may die a horrible death of ethnic cleansing ordered by God, and massacre even of your children, and confiscation of all your possessions, mandated by God. But he's done with you when the grave closes over you. There's no punishment of the dead. Gentle Jesus, meek and mild, proposed by the New Testament types as a less forbidding figure than the Old Testament. God says, "Depart from me, if you don't agree, into everlasting fire." So the filthy concept of hell that's been used to terrorize children and lie to people by cynical priests and rabbis and imams for years less so the rabbis. Comes from gentle Jesus, meek and mild. Which book are these people quoting from? Which bit of it? Why do they think it isn't man-made when it so self-evidently is? We don't have any supernatural authority, ladies and gentlemen, in literary criticism. We're left alone with our day, and the time is short, and history to the defeated may say alas, but cannot help or pardon. And the reference upward to the supernatural authority is an abdication of our most precious faculty, our own responsibility. And we cannot abdicate that, and religion asks us to do so.
With all due, Christopher, with the greatest possible respect, Christopher,
My dear chap.
the Jewish prayer books do, and the Old Testament Jewish prayer books do repeatedly refer to being inscribed in the book of life and not in the book of death. So I think there must be some belief in life after death, but maybe I'm mistaken.
Well, Judaism makes less of the afterlife than Christianity or Islam does, considerably less. And it also, of course, doesn't proselytize as much, or really at all, except among Jews. And it doesn't make this stupid mistake of saying that the Messiah has already arrived, which Christianity does make, and Islam sort of suggests, at least the final revelation has already occurred. At least Maimonides has the grace to say, the Messiah will come, yes, but he may tarry. That I won't say that Judaism is superior, because it makes a racist sectarian claim that God has revealed himself only to one Bronze Age, greedy, ambitious military tribe. But it is at least a little superior to the stupid Christian and Islamic plagiarisms that have been stolen from Jewish books.
I think you're from that tribe too, Chris. So there's a
yes, I speak with feeling.
So, but there's a
do not regard myself as particularly redeemed or marked in my foreskin for a special a revelation or salvation, and I despise anyone who thinks like that. I don't think people should think with their dicks, or their epidermis, or their pudenda. Okay? Call me old-fashioned if you like.
Christopher, do you think that there are tens of thousands, if not, I don't know the exact number, but hundreds of thousands of men and women who work in faith in this country? Do you think they're all charlatans and frauds?
No, I don't. I mean, I've met many people who are more, I would consider morally superior to myself, not just in this country, but in other countries too, who it's quite clear to me are doing what they do for their faith, which often is, for example, Mormonism, which I consider to be a racket, or Pentecostalism, which I consider to be a delusion, but they're doing it for that reason. However, all over the world and in the United States, I've met people who try and help others for its own sake, not to proselytize for their church, not to proselytize for their faith, not to argue that there are invisible means of support or later means of redemption, but because they are humanists and humanitarians. And I think it's to them that the credit should go. I have to say I suspect those who go as Mormons to work in Bolivia to try and convince ignorant, innocent, needy, desperate people by handouts that Joseph Smith dug up gold plates written by God in upstate New York. I think that's a terrible way to be living your life.
Mormonism is not our topic tonight, but
we've discussed several subjects that are not our topic.
Faith is, though, and if faith is good, that's as good as anyone else's.
Well, let me just say
and as a motive for charitable work, which was the question Comrade Stein asked me, as a motive for charitable and missionary work, it's a notoriously very strong one, is it not? Mormons have to spend a lot of time as missionaries working for others to convince them that an absolute crackpot fantasy is a gift from God.
Let me bring it back to religion and science, if I could, for a moment. This question for both of you, and I'll begin with Jay Richards. So the late
Crackpot racist fantasy, by the way, since until 1979,
You're filibustering here.
No black. Since I was asked, crackpot racist fantasy since till 1979, no black person was admitted by the Mormon Church to have a soul.
Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you back the next time for our discussion about Mormonism and its history. But right now, what I'd like to do is bring it back to religion and science, and I'd like to ask Mr. Richards, and I'd like for Christopher to comment. The late Stephen Jay Gould, a man that Christopher greatly admires, and many of us do, noted that surveys show that almost half of all scientists are religious. So he commented, either half of all my colleagues are enormously stupid, or else the science of Darwinism is fully compatible with conventional religious beliefs and equally compatible with atheism. What is your reaction to that, Mr. Richards, to Gould's observation about science?
Well, I think it's true, and it has been for about 80 years, that if you poll general natural scientists, it's between 40 and 50%. Strangely, the physical sciences and mathematics seem to be a little over 50%. Sociology is down in about 20%. I don't know the significance of that. But that's sort of the spread, and it's been about 50-50 for about 80 years. So I think it's a contradiction, at least, of the certainty of the secularization thesis, which is that the more intelligent people get, the more secular and less religious they get. I do, however, disagree with Gould about Darwinism. I don't think that Darwin's theory of evolution is logically incompatible with theism. It's possible that God created a world in which he set things up in such a way that organisms have a certain type of adaptability that's sort of open source, so that they derive most of their adaptive complexity through a process from the environment. That's sort of the picture that Darwinism would paint. So I don't think Darwinism per se, because it really is simply a description of the complexification of life after you get the origin of life, is fundamentally or sort of logically incompatible with theism. So I think it's really an empirical question of whether organisms are actually built that way, what the explanatory power of Darwinism is, and so forth. Nevertheless, I tend to agree more with Richard Dawkins, who said that Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. He didn't say it proved that God didn't exist or something that strongly. His point was that there are many things in biology that look very strongly to most people, at least intuitively, like they're designed. And Dawkins and many people took the Darwinian revolution to sort of finally establish and vanquish this last area of the natural world from this design intuition. The reality is, though, is that the evidence waxes and wanes. I think there was a time in the 19th century when the case against design was stronger than it was now. At the beginning of the 21st century, when we know the universe had a beginning, and I think we know much more about the limits to the Darwinian mechanism and much more rigorously understand the nature and the aspects of designing, I think we're in a different perspective, both intellectually and philosophically, but also with respect to the evidence. So I wouldn't fully disagree with Gould, but I do say that Darwinism, if it's totalizing explanation, sort of encourages atheism, and that if there's strong evidence for design in biology, that sort of encourages theism. That's how I'd put it.
For your response to Gould's comment.
I should be quick, because I've been accused of hogging time to now. But Sir Isaac Newton, the founder of modern science, believed in alchemy and spent a lot of his time practicing it. The traces in his hair of lead and mercury from alchemical crazy experiments are very heavy, the hair that his descendants kept. He wouldn't take his oath. He was supposed to, at Cambridge, to take an oath to the established church. He wouldn't take it because it meant taking an oath to the Trinity, which he regarded as a vile heresy from the whore of Babylon, the Church of Rome. He wanted to keep all Catholics out of the university. He was a madman when it came to religion. He thought everything in the universe could be inferred from the design of the Temple of Solomon, which he thought he could work out from first principles, that he was the greatest scientist of his day. Alfred Russel Wallace, Darwin's great collaborator and perhaps forerunner, was never happier than at spiritualist seances with ectoplasm. Joseph Priestley, who we think effectively discovered oxygen, believed in the phlogiston theory. Francis Crick, who discovered with James Watson the double helix, thought, as Newton did, that human life probably came to Earth as the sort of semen on the end of the comet's tail, or the meteor's tail. We were seeded from the... his colleague James Watson has recently proved himself to be a pseudo-scientific racist. Pretty shabby record. There is absolutely nothing in science that prevents you from being a crackpot, a racist, a nutbag, an eccentric, a pseudo-scientist as well. That's the way we're made. Not until Albert Einstein does one get pure mind, more or less pure mind, and more or less pure humanism. And even he was very soft on Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union.
Okay, we're getting a lot of good questions from around the country, and so we're going to go to those questions, and also from the audience. And I think, Ben, you have those questions.
I have quite a few questions here. I'll ask you this first, Jay. May I call you Jay?
Yes, please.
What is the purpose of life, and what are we living for?
That again is not the subject of the debate. I don't believe. As has been exposed,
Well,
I'm a
just play
Christian.
with it for a
I'm
minute.
essentially an evangelical Christian. I happen to like the Westminster Shorter Catechism's answer that the chief end of man, of human beings, is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. I like that. I don't think you're going to discern that from cosmology.